Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Therefore, it is time for another teissTalk. I'm your host, Jeff White. Every Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, we are live. Every Tuesday afternoon at 4, it's my colleague, Jenny Radcliffe, who is also live with the teissTalk on Tuesday afternoon. The award-winning teissTalk, no less. Last night, we had the European Cybersecurity Bloggers Awards run by Eskenzi PR, and we won. We won best. Well, I won't tell you actually which category we won. Because if you want to win a teissTalk mug, if you're one of our few viewers who hasn't won a teissTalk mug, or if you want to complete your collection and build up to a dozen, tell us what category we won in. That is going to be the person who tells us the category we won in will get a teissTalk mug this morning. So listen, thanks for joining us. Great to have you back with us, those of you returning. Great to have new people as well. Do spread the word if you've got people who think you'd be interested in this. We are discussing all of the key topics in cybersecurity. And today we're going to be talking about the hybrid work environment and security awareness. How do you do security awareness when some people are in work and some people are away? And we've got a fantastic panel to be talking to us about that. There's a chat panel there. Do get involved. Do send us a chat. Let us know you're there. Give us a wave. Say hello. And as I say, if you know what category we won in last night, the Cybersecurity Awards, then drop a note in the chat and you win a mug. Simple as that. Merch, so to speak. We have got a great panel to talk to us about today about security awareness training in a hybrid environment. We've got Jordi Mullers, who is Chief Information Security Officer at NG Services in Netherlands. We've got Nick Harris, who's Associate Director of Information Security and Cyber Resilience at Oxford Nanopore Technologies. And we've got Sarah James, who is Behaviour and Culture Specialist at Layer 8. But first, I want to talk on this topic to our first guest, who is Stu Hurst, who's Chief Information Security Officer at Trustpilot and has also worked at lots of other companies besides. Stu, how are you doing? I've got a frozen grab of you there. I'm hoping you'll come back to me.
Morning, Jeff. Good to speak to you. Thanks for having me.
Indeed. And how are you getting on? How are you feeling today? How have you been with the lockdown and so on?
Yeah, not too bad. I guess we've all tried to maneuver our way through the craziness, haven't we, over the last sort of 15 months and tried to adapt. I've been quite used to remote working even before COVID times, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a bit of a slog now, and we want to get back to some kind of hybrid working, as we're going to talk about shortly.
I went into an office for the first time on, I think it was Monday, Tuesday. I went into the BBC, actually into the offices, and I finally met the producer I've been working with for the last 9 months in person. I mean, we speak pretty much every day, and I'd never met this woman. It was a bizarre experience. And you go in, it's exciting. But on the other hand, it's just empty desks. It feels like being in on a Sunday. Every day is Sunday.
Indeed, yeah. And there's a kind of nervousness as well about behaviour and what's the expected kind of norms as we get back to normality.
Yeah, indeed. I've seen you talk a lot at conferences, actually. I've seen you do a lot of talks. Do you miss doing, A, do you miss conferences, and B, do you miss the talks? Because those are two different questions, I think.
Yeah, there's just something about speaking in person. I actually get far more nervous speaking in person than I do online. No. Maybe it's because I've got whiteboards and things here that I can reference or whatnot. But yeah, there's just the connection, isn't there, when you're in person? There's obviously the sort of social side to it as well that we all enjoy, and mixing with people and sort of getting to know people in the industry, which is a shame. We don't have that just now. I think there's a fatigue. There's the old Zoom fatigue kicking in, I think, as well, where you've been online all day with your colleagues, and sometimes the last thing you want to do is spend another couple of hours at night on more calls. But yeah, definitely looking forward to getting back to in-person events.
Yeah, indeed. It's interesting. I get more nervous on the online talks. I find them more nerve-wracking than the in-person ones, because the in-person ones, there's somebody there to take care of the sound and the lights and all that kind of thing. You just have to go up and talk. Whereas with the online stuff, you've got your internet connection, you've got a microphone, there's lots of sort of technical and logistical stuff that has to work and that you're in charge of.
So myself and Harry McLaren run Cyber Scotland Connect, and we pivoted the way that obviously lots of events organisers have last year. And the first one we did was kind of rife with tech problems, unfortunately. And you're trying to actually run the event, but also behind the scenes panic and get everything kind of running. And it's a different dynamic when you're not used to doing that.
Yeah, ideally you want somebody who does the tech and then somebody does the talk, but it's not necessarily always like that. We've been watching, my wife and I have been watching a series called Startup, which is actually quite a good series on Netflix. Other platforms are available. And they were at a conference. They sort of mocked up a big technology conference for this drama, fictionalized a conference. I just looked at it and I was like, oh, booths. There were booths. There were lanyards. And I never thought I would miss booths and lanyards as much as I do. Bizarre. Anyway, to the subject in hand, which is security awareness and the hybrid working environment. I mean, firstly, at Trustpilot, how are things working in the near future for you guys? How many people back in the office? How many away? What's the plan at Trustpilot?
Yeah, so the IT ops teams and various other teams within the business have been working really hard over the last 8 to 10 weeks, or probably longer actually, to come up with plans about how the offices return. We're split over numerous geographies, as a lot of companies are. So there's subtleties within those geographies, not just because of COVID, but how those offices run. And they've worked really hard. We're getting to a point where we are starting to look to open offices up. I think our Copenhagen office is open for limited numbers, with certain kind of restrictions in place. But very, very keen to kind of offer that as an opportunity again for people to get back to offices. We've got quite there's some interesting nuances around the different parts of the world. So Copenhagen, for example, they have a system where their kind of lunches are paid for as part of their employment. So people are quite keen to get back to the office because they have some perks that come with that. But we might see in some other geographies that maybe there's more of a split, perhaps.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, by the way, Pendle Jackson just won a mug. Well done, Pendle. Best up-and-coming podcast was, of course, the category we won at the European Security Bloggers Awards last night. Bizarre because we're not technically a podcast, but we've not told anybody about that. It's like winning the Oscars for a stage play. But that was the category. Well done, Pendle. You win a mug. Stu, actually, we should sort of talk about Trustpilot. How many countries, because I'm familiar with it, it's sort of where you find reviews of tradespeople and that kind of thing. But how many territories is it across? What's the sort of scale of the business?
Yeah, we have offices in New York, Denver, Vilnius, Copenhagen, Berlin, London, Edinburgh, Melbourne as well, actually. So we're quite distributed and growing in a number of those markets. So yeah, really, really interesting time to join as well. We IPO'd in March. So really interesting growth period for the company.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of those different offices, is there one office that seems that's sort of taking the lead in terms of moving into this hybrid working environment and that you're learning lessons from?
Good question. I would say the Copenhagen office, with it being the biggest office, although there has been a kind of working from home culture, as a lot of tech businesses have, I think that's the one that's pivoted the most given the numbers. But also might be the one that returns in the highest numbers compared to perhaps some of the other geographical areas. The Edinburgh office is growing quite rapidly. We've just moved into a new large office space. It'll be an interesting few months just to see who we're working on. Kind of three different setups, really, either fully remote, a mixture of both, or fully back to the office if that's what you want to do. So there's kind of a nice mix for people to choose there.
And so each office will offer those three options to each employee. Is that kind of how?
Essentially, depending on role, there'll be some roles where perhaps for operational reasons there's a need to be on site or various other reasons. But yeah, we're trying to be as flexible as we can, and I'm sure most businesses are trying to do that. I've seen a shift actually between, as these 15, 16 months has gone on. I think you see it, and this is just my personal experience of around Christmas time, there seemed to be an acceptance that working from home was what we were all going to continue to do, perhaps some people forever now, and that's what they're happy doing. And actually, as the months have gone on into this year, I'm seeing more people want to get back to an office in some capacity, perhaps not 5 days a week with commutes, but I think people miss the social interaction more than the being in an office particularly.
I think this is the thing. I think the pendulum is swinging back, and most people say, "Well, it'll never swing back fully." But I do think, if you'd have said to people at the beginning of last year, January last year, "Oh, by the way, by April you won't be leaving the house," you'll literally be leaving the house for a half-hour mandated walk each day, I'd have said, "Bollocks, will we do that?" And yet we, within a few months we adapted. So, the idea that we can't switch back to exactly how things were, I think, you've got to question that. So it's going to be interesting to see how far that pendulum comes back. But Stu, I wanted to ask you that. So that's interesting. So you've got these three possibilities for employees. Has that helped you in terms of being a CISO to put in place, okay, option 1, 2, and 3, here's the security and the systems we put in place for options 1, 2, and 3. Has that helped you systematize how your security
I would say on a personal level, I haven't really figured that out yet, actually. We're sort of just all working our way through a fairly fluid situation where even as we speak, there are things changing in different countries around roadmaps and things. So from a planning point of view, it's actually quite difficult. What I would say is it appears that most of the businesses on the planet have pivoted brilliantly to remote working, and they've run their businesses from home over the last 14, 15 months, which has probably got rid of or shattered some of the old illusions of certain things have to be done on site, leadership or certain types of collaboration, and we've forced our way into that way of working. So yeah, from a security point of view, I guess like anybody who's just trying to feel our way through it's been a very unique set of circumstances, and then to have to look further on about how we cater for more scenarios perhaps than we would have done previously. Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
In terms of, but how long have you been with Trustpilot? Because that's
just 3 months. Yeah,
just 3 months. Right? Yeah. So basically, so you've now got this. You've come in. Presumably, there was some kind of security awareness project at Trustpilot. There was some kind of security awareness thing. Looking at the next sort of 6 months, 12 months or so, how are you handling that? Because normally you'd have a security awareness rolling program, and you'd be able to work out whether it's successful, and you get some results back, and you can monitor things. You're not only in a new company, but you're in a new company at a really dynamic time. So how are you going to work out the security awareness training you do, and how you monitor the effectiveness of it?
Yeah. On the one hand, it's been easy to speak to everybody across the business in a way that perhaps wouldn't have happened previously. And the tech helps with that. But also, I think in the kind of role that I'm in just now, there's a hell of a lot of leverage in physically meeting people and building relationships across the business as you start to build awareness or try and drive cultures forward. So that's obviously been missing, and something I'm personally looking forward to getting back to. It's trying to be cognizant now that people can be anywhere at any point in time, and there isn't as much of a strict regime that people are following in the way they might have done at 9 to 5 in the office. We've now got this very open, flexible working pattern where on a day-to-day basis you can choose where you are and how you go about doing your work, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be kind of at home. People can be traveling, coffee shops, wherever they want to go and do their work. I think we're moving into that world, aren't we, of you can be anywhere to do your work if you've got a decent internet connection.
Have you seen so John's just commented, so many colleagues are starting new roles in the last year or so. Same with us. Culture is hard to build and maintain, especially for security awareness, which is a really interesting point as well. I mean, you're new in the business. I imagine Trustpilot, being an online business, has been either growing or expanding healthily over the last year or so. You've got a whole bunch of new people. You're new.
Indeed, who I've not met, physically. A lot of these people, including my peers, leadership team, where you would normally be building those relationships in person, as I said before, and that's not been there. But it's not to say that we haven't been able to do that to a certain extent, and I think the tech's been really valuable, bit beyond the way that we might have used it previously.
How easy is it then for you to get the hang of because you've worked at lots of different places? I keep having to refresh my memory on your CV, but you worked at Moonpig, were you with a while back? And then
so I did my kind of security journey has been the train line, and then I did Skyscanner for 3 years, and then I did Capital One, Photobox, and Moonpig, and then Just Eat for nearly a couple of years before moving on to Trustpilot.
So when you go into a place, presumably at a certain stage, you start to get the hang of what their security culture is like and so on. How easy are you finding that in Trustpilot, having been there for a few months and it being all virtual? How do you go about getting a sense of like what's the security culture like here when you can't go into the office and just ask people?
Yeah, I've had some very interesting conversations about this over the last few days, even around when you're on Zoom calls. You can do small talk to a certain extent, but there's generally kind of an agenda, and you talk through items of work. There's less of the water cooler chat or the small talk or the beer after work or the coffee at lunchtime, whatever it might be. There's not really that much of that, and frankly, that's where a lot of the measuring perhaps of culture can come from. It's just having those conversations with various people that you might not normally bump into in the business. I can go and create meetings with X, Y, and Z across various teams, but it's that bumping into somebody in the office and then just having that conversation, or somebody brings a problem to you that they wouldn't have normally raised on Slack or on a call. And I think that can help you measure. I mean, that takes time to do. That's sort of what I've been doing for the few months I've been here, around just speak to as many people as I can. But obviously it's been online, and I've not been able to have those side of desk chats that I would normally perhaps have.
Yeah. Interesting comment from Jonty there. The water cooler was my primary source of CTI, counter threat intelligence, I'm going to guess. I got this weird email, somebody says, and so on. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And it's how you sort of replicate that online. Have you seen examples, Stu, of good examples of that, of things people have been able to do to try and replicate that kind of culture?
In the couple of companies I've been in since COVID kicked off, I think everyone's tried really, really hard to replicate that as best they can. I've seen, like, at Just Eat, we had a Google Hangout that was open all day that you could just go and join and see if anybody was on it, and sort of grab a coffee and get some small talk, and it not necessarily even work related, just go in and shoot the breeze. They seem to do quite well in those initial few months as people tried to adjust. I think there was a fatigue as the months have gone on around those kind of things. They became less valuable, and I've seen that in other areas as well during COVID, where lots of social events, the kind of post 5 p.m. Friday online get together, they just tailored off a little bit towards the end of the year as people got a little bit bored with them. I think just trying to invigorate those things, and so security awareness will be part of that. But how do you sort of continually invigorate these programs to keep people interested, to keep people on board?
It's like the family Zoom quizzes. I think the phrase Zoom quiz now is associated with "please kill me." It's trying to keep that going. Maybe just me, maybe just my family Zoom quiz. Interesting stuff. Thanks for that, Stuart. A really good overview, and gets us into the various of the issues we're going to be discussing with the rest of our panel, who I want to bring in now. We have from the Netherlands, we have Jordi Mullers, who is Chief Information Security Officer at NG Services. We've also got Nick Harris, who's Associate Director, Information Security and Cyber Resilience at Oxford Nanopore Technologies, and Sarah Janes, who's Behaviour and Culture Specialist at Layer 8. Sarah, can I come to you first of all? It's a very coordinated. You're sort of top on the background. The wall is very on trend. That colour's very on trend. It's aesthetically pleasing webcam. Certainly more aesthetically pleasing than mine. And Stu's frozen, but Stu's frozen in a really sort of charming kind of charming way. So Sarah, firstly, tell us about Layer 8, because it's a company people may not have come across. What's Layer 8 about?
Yeah, no worries. So Layer 8 is a company that I set up about 6 years ago now, really trying to answer this question: is it possible to change behaviour? Is it possible to move from kind of the compliance-based approach to security awareness to actually changing behaviour? Something that we came across quite early in that is this concept around its conversation, and Stu said it, in his piece earlier, it's about the relationship. So we focus on conversation being the catalyst for change, and how we can sort of work towards that, mainly through developing champions networks. That's what we're doing every day.
Interesting stuff. Good, thanks for that. And we'll come back to you, because some interesting insights from a survey that you carried out fairly recently. Nick, Oxford Nanopore, for people who don't know it, what does Oxford Nanopore do, and how busy have you guys been recently in the pandemic?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, thanks for having me. Oxford Nanopore, we're actually a spin out of the university of about 15 years ago. We've grown to about 750 people, and some very, very clever people, far more intelligent than I am, worked out a way to very rapidly sequence genome. So I think that the quote they have out is Dolly the sheep cost about $1 billion. It can now be done for 1,000. So that's the sort of order of magnitude that this technology enables. But if you can sequence a genome, and a virus has a genome, you can sequence COVID and you can test for COVID. So we've been very busy providing quite a lot of the testing sort of devices and equipment, and even some mobile testing vans over the last 18 months or so.
I see. So your Oxford Nanopore stuff is actually part of the coronavirus testing regime at the moment?
That's right. So we don't provide the service per se, but we provide the equipment and the materials by which the labs can do some of the testing. And it's the more detailed testing. So it's not just the positive negative, it's about what variance is and how's the DNA evolving, and it allows that degree of sort of analysis.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had a conversation with a hairdresser the other day. I had my hair cut, and he was saying, "Oh, the coronavirus, it's just flu. It's the same as flu." And trying to explain to him the idea of that you can genetically test viruses was through a mask. Obviously, both of us wearing masks just didn't go very well. Jordi, hello from the Netherlands. For those who don't know, NG, what does NG do? What's the nature of the business?
Well, Engie is in the past it was an energy company, but they also do several utilities. And in the Netherlands, the utilities department is far out the biggest. There's just a little energy department, and utilities, as in building technical installations for a wide scope of industries.
Good stuff. Thanks, thanks for that, Jordi. Nick, can I come back to you, because you've presumably you've grown quite a lot over the last year, and you've got people who, you know, again like us, you've never met, colleagues that you've never met. Talk to us about that, about trying to sort of, you know, instill the security awareness in those folks.
Yeah, I think a bit like Stu, really. We are both joiners during COVID. So Nanopore itself has grown by over 100 people in the last year, me being one of those. So a bit like with Stu, from a personal level, engaging with the people on the shop floor, as it were, and the labs, as well as the execs, to get that more sort of that feel of how the business is, rather than just sort of data and metrics and budget sheets, has been quite a challenge. But then we've got that challenge of engaging the staff, and to some degree, some of the new joiners have gone straight into the lab. So our labs have always been open, our manufacturing has always been open. They have that role has never really changed, and we just have to have very stringent COVID sort of bubbling around those individuals. Some people have gone straight home and they've never been to the office at all. So trying to sort of mirror up how we reach out to them, how we engage with them, how they engage with us, has been a real challenge. And actually, it's the people at home have been easier, because the people we've got in the labs and manufacturing aren't on our InfoSec Slack channel. We can't reach out to them as easier. They've got their white coats on and they're beavering away. But if they're at the desk at home, it's actually a lot easier to engage. And bar the fact we haven't had to focus so much on, and we're coming on to obviously hybrid in a second, but the in-office activity has sort of waned off, less posters, less visible reminders. The online shift has worked fine, really, and people have been quite used to having Zoom calls for work, as well as engaging with us online for sort of security aspects.
Interesting. Sarah, yeah, I want to come to you on this, because one of the things from your survey that was interesting was people wanting to be contacted by security, and people who had been contacted by security at work. Talk us through those figures.
Yeah, really interesting. So we asked the question, how many people had been contacted by somebody from the security team over lockdown to help them set up their home. And there was 26% of people had been contacted, but actually around 50%, just under 50% of people had said, actually, I'd really like to be contacted, either a one-to-one conversation with somebody that can help facilitate the change, or a presentation by for people to have some contact and some relationship building with security. Perhaps, and the survey didn't go into this in detail, but perhaps it's due to you know, all of the kind of the phishing activities and those sorts of things, I think, have become a lot more apparent over the pandemic, and perhaps there was concern about friends, families, etc. During that period as well.
Yeah, this is what I find really interesting, is the idea of, you know, the work and home division sort of really finally breaking down. It's been under stress for a long time, but that idea of, you know, work is now part of your home environment. Stuart, is that one way you can potentially reach out to people, is, you know, by saying, look, if you are working from home, your work security now effectively becomes your home security, and that's something people, you know, hold very close to their heart.
Yeah, I think that's what we've been seeing in the industry for a little while, haven't we? Around trying to, if we can embed good security practice in people's personal lives, then they are more likely to bring that into the working environment. Obviously, the working environment is now the home environment, and those things are blurred more than they ever have been. It's always sort of bugged me a little bit that people think there's a hard stop between, you know, how you personally deal with tech, and then you go into an office and somehow it should be something completely different. Much of the many of the things that we try and evangelize are fundamentally the same things around what to protect and how to go about doing it. I think there's the working day has become different for people now at home. So you would have that 9 to 5 perhaps in an office if you're in that kind of role. Now people are adjusting their day to work at all sorts of times to cater for children or whatever. So there's complexities about how you make that available, how you secure it, how you operationalize working at other times of the day that we haven't been used to.
Yeah. Jordi, can I come to you? Just following up on Nick's point. Obviously, Nick was saying that they have a lot of people out in labs, and actually potentially they're a bit more difficult to reach because they're not sort of online all the time. I imagine in energy it's the same. You have engineers out in the field, you have folks in the office. How do you manage that?
Well, that's a very difficult story. The fun thing is that I started also like Nick and also like Stu, I think, in the pandemic. So I started from home in my new function, and it was very hard to connect with people because a lot of mechanics, they were working in the fields, and I'm working from my home office and trying to make policies and not being the bully that stops everything. So it's hard to create policies. At this time, when you see that people are getting back to the office, you get a hybrid situation of mechanics that were already in the office and they were reached by security, but from security from home. Security people were working from home. So now we have to create a new situation where we're all leveling again. Everything is the same for everybody, and that's a struggle.
And this is the thing, Sarah, isn't it? It's not just trying to work out, how you do remote working, how you do in office working, but making sure the experience people get is seamless. That actually you get the same satisfying and secure experience wherever you are. That's the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things about security culture is I think in a lot of organisations, it's just been allowed to happen and there's a security culture that exists. One of the things that organisations might need to look at a bit more formally is how they curate that security culture through the types of relationships that they have with people. Are new and different relationships required, like ones right down, inside certain functions, perhaps even with people who already know that team already, who've already built up a trusted relationship with them, who's your kind of route through. How you and your team behave as leaders and the words that you use, so how other people are viewing security. And also I think what's really important in curating that security culture is how you can identify those stories and those moments that matter, those good practices that can be shared.
Yeah, interesting. Staying with you, Sarah. So a lot of what you've done in the past has been about conversations and trying to stimulate those conversations in the workplace. But how do you give us some insight? How can actually Nick, Jordi, and Stu? How can you replicate those conversations effectively in online or a mixture of online and offline?
So. What we look at doing is really trying to find out the values of the people within the organisation, because people come to work and they turn up for their paycheck, absolutely, but for lots of other different reasons as well. So if we find that we can have conversations with people and really understand their values by asking questions like, tell me a time about a time where you felt proud and enthusiastic to defend your business. What were you doing? Who were you talking to? The idea is really to establish the core values that underlie why people come to work and protect the business and do the right things. Which gives a really good sort of underlying set of values to say, okay, and if we were doing those things every day as the norm rather than the exception, what kind of security culture could we create? And looking at doing that collaboratively with people. Sorry, long answer.
No, it's all right. No, it's okay. Sarah, do you think that it would help to try and integrate the security awareness stuff that people are doing for homework and for office work and remote work, or do they need to be two separate channels? But is there benefit to kind of combining them to pull everybody into the same room, even if some rooms are physical, some rooms are virtual, or should inevitably they're going to be two separate channels?
I think pulling people into the same room would be really useful to have those discussions about. Because I think it's not just black and white. There's so many crossovers with the hybrid working model that it's very difficult to box. This is what you do at home and this is what you do at the office. I think bringing people into the same environment where they can talk about things that they've learned at home, how that translates back into the office and vice versa, would be useful. Yes, so I would condone sort of combining those messages together.
Interesting stuff. We've had a couple of questions, a couple of really good questions actually. Anastasios has asked, and I'm going to ask this of all of you, but Stu first of all on this, because you talked about this. How can you address security fatigue while employees also experience pandemic fatigue and anxiety? It's that refreshing the message and renewing the message. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. It's knowing what pace to go at, frankly, and there isn't a right answer to that. I'll give you my experience just now is, new into a role, wanting to be seen, wanting to be driving some cool pieces of work, but alongside lots of other important business things at a time where there is fatigue in general in the population and people having struggled quite a lot. There isn't a right answer to that. It's just trying to understand what pace you can go at alongside all the other things you need to do. Sometimes it's the quick wins or just picking off the low-hanging fruit sometimes rather than those big projects which will take a bit more time. This balancing act, I think, trying to just be aware that this is a thing, right? Fatigue at the moment and people struggling towards the end of what this is a thing, and that we need to be cognizant of it.
Nick, on that front,
Stu's point about fatigue and pace is really, really important. The other aspect we've got in sort of trying to address that is it's got to be useful and to a degree valuable to the people you're speaking to. So yes, I really favour servers all in one room, even if you're working at home, but we have smaller groups in one room. So if it's a privacy related conversation, let's have HR and customer services in. If it's about secure development, we'll have a different community. So it's relevant, and that's the same with the online sort of training we do. It's relevant to the audience. So they're not someone who never deals with personal data isn't having to go through another hour of GDPR training. We try and sort of avoid that, and that really helps. But also we've gone beyond sort of the home working to try and offer a bit more value. So we've shared, for example, GCHQ's sort of online games ahead of half term. There's about a dozen sort of freebie things with Bletchley Park stuff in there. The Stay Safe online stuff about cyberbullying, because if you're keeping the family safe and if they think they're getting something from it, then they're more likely to engage, and actually that practice will then kind of perpetuate back into the business.
Interesting stuff. And Jordi, in terms of challenge, tackling fatigue, what sense have you got for how fatigued employees are about this, and how do you get around that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a very important point. I discovered that there is a lot of fatigue in about cybersecurity and cybersecurity trainings, and I think it's also because of the way of how NG is organized, because you're a very broad company with very broad people with a lot of other things to do. So, and we have just one awareness training for everybody. So, like Nick said, that leads to a lot of fatigue. But I think some of the strangest things is that we have this for working at home. We have this policy that you can order a desk and you order a screen and a chair, and you have to commit yourself to a lot of health and safety regulations for working at home. But there are no security regulations, so that's a strange thing. So that's also that you see that the security awareness at home is not yet at the same level as when you are at the office.
But you were saying, didn't you say that you'd change that? That actually, if you're going to work from home, you now do with NG have to do some security training. Is that right?
Yeah, we have the security training is not mandatory at this moment. So I think I looked it up yesterday. It was 24% of our population did the security training. So one out of four, and we started to let the security training be mandatory for people. And the first thing we started is that when you apply for working at home, you are obliged to do the security training. So that's the first thing to get more people aware of the training. And with that, you don't hit the mechanics that they can't work from home. So you get a specific group, and that works better.
Interesting. I think we should do it sounds like something we could do a poll on. Should we try and do a poll? We have our teissTalk who beavers away in the background helping us out on this. So I wonder if our teissTalk could do a little poll for our attendees. Should employees working from home be forced to do security awareness training or mandated to do security awareness training? I think it would be an interesting one. We can get that poll together. It'd be great. Another question from Tony Pamphlet here, which I thought was a really interesting one. How do we best communicate the safe at home, safe at work message? Oh, hang on, it's popped up on my screen. There we go. I'm going to submit that. Back to the question then. So yes, how do we best communicate the safe at home, safe at work message when people are carrying a portable office with them? Because obviously, you know, people carrying devices in and out. Stu, you were talking about this when we spoke yesterday. How do you tackle that one of people taking literally computer monitors and towers home and bringing them back into work?
Yeah, I mean, when we chatted yesterday briefly, it was that people will be carrying equipment more than they probably ever have been. Hopefully not, you know, server stacks and things, but you know, laptops in bags and phone. Well, we carry phones a lot anyway, but yeah, far more work equipment will be being transported around the place. So probably need to be cognizant over the next few months that there will be maybe more thefts or loss of some of those things. So I think it's just trying to understand some of the subtleties of how we're now working and whether that presents more risk or different types of risk in various different areas.
Interesting. Nick, what's the strategy at Oxford Nanopore on that? Because obviously you've got, you know, incredibly valuable IP at the office. How do you handle people carrying it home, taking it home, and sort of physical side of it?
I guess at one aspect, there's always that risk-based approach. We know who handles the IP. We have some really critical trade secrets IP, which the business is dependent on. We know where that is. We know who handles it. And then there's other information out there which that our staff handle, which we have different sort of controls around. So firstly, knowing where your sort of crown jewels lie and who's got access to them means that you can have different degrees of stringent access. But what we did was quite early on, actually, we just had a checklist. And the idea was you could essentially stick it to the top of your laptop screen. I don't know if anyone did, but the idea was there anyway. And it was just simple things to do when you got home. And it was a bit of a snapshot of what was in our typical work policy, but it went a bit further to say, look, if your kid is short of a laptop and they're trying to homeschool, have a separate account for them. Don't let them just go onto your email. And so we had little checklists that just meant that they didn't have to trawl through documentation, but it was just at the fingertips, and it just to let them know that what things they could do, what sort of steps they could make, home Wi-Fi routing practices, etc., that would help them when they got there.
Interesting stuff. We've had the results from our polls, which is probably no surprise to anybody. Should employees working from home be forced to do security awareness training? 89% of our audience says yes, because large majority of our audience are security folks. Look, if you said no to that, actually, do put in the chat as to why you don't think that's a good idea. Because I'm quite interested. I mean, it seems to make on the face of it perfect sense, but perhaps there's counterintuitive aspects to that. Just in terms of what Nick was talking about there, and this sort of carrying stuff home from work and all that kind of thing. I mean, obviously, Sarah, there's different sizes of businesses, and you know, not all businesses are of the scale of, you know, NG and Trustpilot and so on. For smaller businesses, how are they handling all of this?
Yeah, I mean, again, on the survey that we did, which was completed by actually quite a lot of people from small businesses, 75% of them said, yes, we're going to be taking our equipment and probably printed documents to and from the office. And that ranged from literally just a laptop through to the keyboard, the mouse, the charger, etc. So lots of different data and equipment in transit. And of course, a lot of small businesses might not be able to afford what Jordi was discussing about, you know, ordering different equipment. So they're just going to have to cope. And, you know, some of the things that I would suggest to organisations is, yes, there's lots of kind of like rules that we can give people. There's lots of advice, which is all great, but about identifying some of those key habits, some of those moments that matter when people interact with a system or a piece of data, and how can we instill some kind of key thoughts, some conscious thoughts in people when they're, you know, moving from the home and the office.
Interesting. Yeah, and you also talked about, I thought it was quite interesting, the idea that security culture used to be, you know, security culture was like a lot of culture, developed on the fly, whereas that security culture now needs to be engineered. You need to actively say, right, what is our security culture going to be and how do we do that, as opposed to just relying on it kind of coming to fruition.
Yeah. So And that's always a difficult one, because I think when you use the word culture, people go, oh my gosh, what does it mean? You know, it could be enormous. So, you know, I would define culture as what people say and what people do that demonstrates what's important to them. And if we can understand that through having the conversations, through the relationships that we've got in the business, we can start to boil that down to a number, perhaps 4 to 7 key habits, that if everybody in the business was exhibiting those, it would mean that the business was much more secure. Those key habits can then, from a process and a measurement perspective, be broken down into these moments that matter, these touch points, high risk critical touch points when people are interacting with a system or piece of data. And then that's what we need to curate in terms of, well, how do we catch people doing the right thing? How do we make sure that we shout about those things and amplify what's happening? How can our words and language with the board, with everybody, sort of move us in the right direction?
Yeah, interesting stuff. Martin's made a good comment, which is about mandating security awareness for working from home. If you feel the need to force people to do the training, you need to look at the approach, content, and how you're selling it. You might make some marginal gains. Oh, hang on. Popped up my screen. You might make some marginal gains, awareness gains, but are you going to change behavior? Good stuff. I just want to come on. Oh, here we go. John's made a good comment actually following up on this. Colleagues often learn how security is done here from leaders in or around the office. With no office and non-visible leaders, getting colleagues to exhibit these key habits both at home and in the office is a huge communication challenge. True that, John. I just want to come in the closing minutes of this to the idea of measuring this, of the metrics. I mean, Stu, you know, in normal times, you would do a security awareness program, phishing exercise, whatever, and then you get the results, and then you would do it again. And how do you get around that challenge at the moment of not only are you in a fluid environment, but getting the metrics, getting the measurements must be a nightmare. How do you get around that challenge?
Yeah, there's been some really good chat here around measuring, actually, just in the last few minutes, and it's notoriously quite difficult, because I think there's been a good point made around, you know, there isn't a one size fits all, and that's either industry, company, or even an individual level. Everybody learns in a different way, and there's different types of information you want to give to different people in the business. We sort of historically go to measurements of bad things happening, you know, so you do your phishing campaign, you can see how many people clicked the link or went into the URL, whatever it is. How do we measure that? I think Sarah's kind of touched on this. How do we measure the positive aspect? Is there even a way to measure the good things people are doing? Because you don't see you don't see a bad knock-on effect from good things happening. So how do you even measure that? Sometimes it's just a palpable feeling, you know, that a culture is moving. It's not necessarily measurable. I think one of the things I've found in my own career is the more people speak to me, the more that people actually sort of come to me with an issue, or they're open to the idea of having a chat to a security team, although that's not brilliantly measurable, is a really good example of you spreading your wings a little bit and getting around the business. I think, you know, I've seen some great training platforms and tools and things that are great, but again, it needs to be tailored to the right sets of people or even individuals to get the value, and that's very different. I could go from a technical OWASP top 10 talk with engineers to something very high level with an exec or you know, something more less technical. So yeah, it's just trying to tailor those conversations to the right areas.
Really interesting stuff. Just aware we're sort of approaching the limits of our time, so I want to thank all of our panelists. So that was a really interesting discussion, and it's one of these things that's just going to keep coming back and back over the next 6 months to a year of how you manage this. So I wish you all best of luck with it. Stu Hurst, Chief Information Security Officer at Trustpilot, Jordi Mullers, CISO at NG Services Netherlands, Nick Harris, Associate Director, Info Security and Cyber Resilience, Oxford Nanopore, and of course, Sarah James, Behavior and Culture Specialist at Layer 8. Thanks to all of you. Their LinkedIn profiles are in the chat, so do click on them and connect if you want to chat to them further. Thanks for all of your questions and comments. It's always great to hear from our audience here at TICE. I am going to quickly go on to the TICE thing and see what we're talking about next Tuesday. My colleague Jenny's talking about next Tuesday. Oh, here we go. The CISO cybersecurity vendor relationship. Oh, that'll be a spicy one. So Jenny Radcliffe next Tuesday at 4 will be speaking to Leda Muller from Stanford University about that. It's going to be a really interesting chat. So do tune in 4 o'clock next Tuesday, and of course 10 a.m. Next Thursday here for our teissTalk. Have a great rest of the week, great weekend. Thanks again to our panelists and we'll see you all again soon on the award-winning teissTalk. Have a great day. Take care. Thank you.